Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk for May 21st, 2023. Got a good show for you today on topic of fallacious philosophy. And our guest host or co-host is a new face for you, someone I think you're going to be exciting to meet, Eric Ozols. And let's see who calls in today on Let's Talk. Let's like and subscribe while you got a chance here before you forget to do that. And we'll see you on the other side of the music.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
Hello, Eric.
Hello, Phil. How are you?
Pretty good. Welcome to your very first Let's Talk. Is this your first online appearance? I can't remember if you've done other YouTube or not.
I think this is probably it. Yeah, the first live call-in show. Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna pull your mic down just a little bit. Sorry about that. Well, welcome, and you and I know each other, so I know you've been doing some great work, and I think this is going to be good format for you. So I'm really happy to introduce you to the audience. Today we're going to talk about fallacious philosophy. The counter or the apologetic arguments are so oddly weak, it seems. That's one of the things that struck me when I first started to get into examining belief and non-belief. I thought that, I made sort of an assumption that there'd be strong arguments on both sides, and it seemed fairly obvious that the apologetic side was oddly weak. What was your reaction? I mean, it goes back for when you started on this yourself, but
Yeah, so my first exposure to it was a guy I was working with. He was supposed to be teaching me my new job, and he pulled out the Book of Mormon and started talking to me like I was supposed to know that. And I woke up all of a sudden and said, "Wait a minute, you can't do that. That's way out of bounds." So I started reading on it because he gave me all the standard apologetics. I hadn't heard of before, all the, Thomas Aquinas and Anselm and Augustine, all the classical stuff, ontological and, objective morality, cosmological, teleological. He started giving me all of them. And everything he was saying, I was instantly impressed with. I know there's something wrong with what you're saying, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And I'm a pretty, I guess, contemplative guy, so I started studying it. And to really be direct and answer your question, the more I studied it, the more I learned about it, I was really blown away by how poor and fallacious they were.
yeah. I went through the same thing. Initially, when you're getting into this, I don't have a philosophy background, so I'm just like an average guy listening to arguments, and it just seemed like, oh, it's me. Yeah, I'm missing something, right? I'm getting something wrong. I'm not understanding these other people in this field I haven't dealt with before know something better. And then you start coming across people like William Lane Craig, who are very confident in their presentation, right, and never back down and stuff. And again, you think it's you. So it still blows me away. So.
William Lane Craig in particular is one of my favorites to point out because he's got a famous quote online saying that he doesn't believe in the supernatural claims of Christianity on the arguments. Alvin Plantinga said the arguments he thinks are weak, and they all believe because of sensus divinitatis or just a presuppositional. I started because I believe this because the Holy Spirit has made an impression on my heart, is to paraphrase what William Lane Craig has said, and Plantinga says similar stuff. So they start with their conclusion and then they guide the evidence to their preferred conclusion, and the arguments are really just, for my money, they're kind of a smokescreen.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because they teach so many other people, right? I mean, other people look at their arguments online now, especially, and this stuff just goes beyond into the average believer's mind. As these are our experts, they've studied these things for tens of years. They've got degrees, so they're the ones who know, and then.
Not only that, but the arguments have been refined over the last several millennia, and it's kind of like Walmart, you can find whatever you want on the shelves, whatever you want to pick, you can walk through an aisle and, oh, I think the teleological argument makes sense to me. Oh, I think the ontological argument makes sense to me. And if the arguments didn't work, if they weren't persuasive or convincing for people who grew up in that indoctrination system, then they wouldn't use it. They've jettisoned a handful of arguments over the years, and they've added a few. And it's like whack-a-mole. They just keep popping up, and we keep addressing them. It's interesting because you mentioned that these guys are teaching. Alvin Planting has retired, but William Lane Craig is still, last I heard, he's still an active teacher at Biola, just down the road in Southern California from me. And I actually applied to get a master's of apologetics at Biola. And I couldn't get accepted. I was rejected by the school with extreme prejudice, if you ask me, because I wouldn't sign their statement of faith. And their statement of faith was all about, it's the typical stuff you always see. California Baptist University has the same one. And it'd take me 20 minutes to name all the schools that have the same statement of faith. But Biola in particular was all the standard stuff. Oh, you're never going to question whether or not, Yahweh is nonfiction or blah, 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 however they phrased it. And I couldn't, I could lie, but then I wouldn't be very happy with myself because I don't like when people lie to me. So I had to mark no, and then I put a few paragraph explanation why. Oh yeah, but I really want to study under William Lane Craig, and I was interested to do it. I had a benefit that I could use, so the school would have been free, so I wouldn't have been giving my own money to Biola, which I couldn't do in good conscience. But it's interesting you mentioned that he's still teaching because I actually applied and was rejected by school because I wouldn't sign their statement of faith.
Well, I mean, even the ones that aren't teaching, everything's on YouTube. I mean, there's just like, we'll go to looking at our people's stuff. Matt Delhunty has got a great series, right, on counter apologetics, and they'll go look at their stuff. So they also, when they have been taught that something is true because it fits their intuition of what could be true, honestly, the arguments seem to make sense. If you don't know, especially if you don't know the science on a lot of stuff. But a lot of that stuff is out there, and a lot of the same apologetic books get cycled and cycled. I mean, I get people all the time asking me things like, have you read The Case for Christ, for example, Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ? And as if that's a good book that it would convince me as an atheist. And it's always fun to tell them, yeah, I read The Case for Christ, and I immediately read the case against The Case for Christ to be properly reading both sides of the issue. And even that particular book was just shocking to me because that was presented as a person who was questioning or wasn't sure what was true. So he was going out to find out and consider the arguments, only to find that the book chapter after chapter was literally just discussions with apologists. There was not a single person representing the other side, if you will, or science or whatever.
Well, I read The Case for Christ and The Case for Faith. I also read The Case Against the Case for Christ. I also read David Limbaugh's book, which is in the same, Rush Limbaugh's younger brother. I read the same book. They're all in the same vein. I've probably read 30 or 40 of those books. It gets very repetitive at a certain point. But it's funny you mentioned that because he did talk to one, I'm going to make air quotes, skeptic, David Berlinski. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes.
He's a secular Jew, and he's a professor at a prestigious university. The name is escaping me right now. But he's a very big, intelligent design, irreducible complexity, like Stephen Meyer and Philip Johnson and Michael Behe, all those guys. He's very much in that vein. And he's polished. He's good at spinning the fallacies, argument of ignorance and argument complexity and all the different tools they have at their disposal. But that was his one token. I'm going to go talk to somebody that doesn't agree with me, but I think the best analogy I ever heard about, it wasn't mine, I wish I could claim it, but it was about The Case for Christ and The Case for Faith about Lee Strobel. It's like deciding who should be your favorite baseball team, and then walking around downtown Boston and saying, hey guys, who's the most wicked, awesome baseball team? And then being surprised when everybody says the Boston Red Sox. It's like, well, of course, because you're talking to a very friendly audience, Yeah, Lee Strobel is one of my favorites too. He was actually one of the first ones to block me on Twitter. Not that I'm proud of that. I'm just. You make one comment and they block you right away because they don't want you talking to their audience. But I mean, it's on his movie poster. He made a movie about to save his marriage. Lee Strobel went out to test the Gospels. Are they true or are they not true? And it's like he had motivated reasoning. He was trying to find whether or not they were right. He was trying to find reasons to think they were right because he didn't want to get divorced. Middle-aged man, it's hard to find a new wife if you lose the first one you had. He loves his wife. There's nothing wrong with that. But he went out and studied the supernatural claims of Christianity with motivated reasoning to save his marriage, and that's not an honest way to go about vetting your ideas.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that piece of it, but yeah,
It's
I've heard of.
it's on his movie poster. He made a movie. I think it's The Case for Christ. I can't remember. I didn't see it, but the movie poster, it's like the first line. It's like, oh, to save his marriage, a reporter from Chicago goes and investigates the Gospels. Are they true or are they not? And it's like, well, you're starting with the motivated reason to find one particular answer, and then you're surprised when you get that answer. Oh, it's totally true. It's like, well, you decided it was true before you got started.
Berlinski, that's familiar. He's the guy that I've had many people bring him up, like he was I want to say he was a non-believer, but he then came to believe in creationism. So they bring him up as like, see, science actually believes in creationism, as if one person's opinion represents the consensus of a scientific field.
There's a movie called No Intelligence Allowed. It's by Ben Stein. And he goes around and talks to, yeah, you're shaking your head like you've seen it. Yeah. He goes around and talks to a bunch of, I don't want to sound too pejorative, cronies of intelligent design and irreducible complexity, all the names I just went through. And David Berlinski was in that film as well. He wrote a couple books. It's right behind me. I'm not going to reach back there and grab it right now, but I read one of his books. It's all the typical standard intelligent design, irreducible complexity stuff. I also read the transcript from the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial in 2015. And that was all about Ken Miller and Michael Behe and that whole time where they were trying to put a creationism statement in school. And they had a book called Of Pandas and People that they were trying to put in the I think it was like a middle school or high school public school library. And the parents flipped out about it. It was a little tiny town in central Pennsylvania called Dover, and the trial went viral basically. And I read the transcript. It was riveting.
I'd like to. I've got it downloaded somewhere, but yeah. And I remember that Stein film you're talking about because it was basically what he was trying to make the argument or point out that there was bias in liberal colleges because they weren't teaching both sides. Something along that effect. It's like, once we discover gravity, once we discover that wheels are round, we don't teach both sides of wheels might be square or they might be round, So we've been through this stuff. So at some point, it is appropriate to not teach, multiple positions. So
yeah, concur.
So I'm going to take us to our question of the week. Let's see, where did I put that? We do a poll each week. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's on the YouTube page. It's in the community tab. So check a couple of days before each show. You'll see this. And this week, I have asked, that is too small for me to read. Let me make that big. Can new knowledge be gained using philosophy alone? This is something I've had a bit of an opinion, and I'm shifting, and I honestly don't know the answer to it. The audience says 67% no, 33% yes. What are your thoughts on this? And then I'll give you mine, and we'll do some back and forth.
It looks like I would be taking the contrarian position. I think new knowledge can be gained using philosophy alone. To put it simply, I can expound if you like.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so philosophy is not knowledge in and of itself. It's a tool we use to gain knowledge. Philo logos, the love of knowledge. We learn things all the time just by thinking about it, not by going out and experimenting the world around us. I know you've heard me do this before about the difference between the analytic synthetic distinction, or what I like to think of as something that's definitional, descriptive, or demonstrable. And you learn a lot of things just by defining, and I'll demonstrate. Okay, so all bachelors are unmarried men. Okay, how do we determine if that statement is true? Well, we can just analyze the definition. So if the word bachelor in this context is unmarried men, then the statement all bachelors are unmarried men really is all unmarried men are unmarried men. It's a tautology. Is it true? Yes, it's 100% true in all possible worlds. If you're treating ontological claims as accurate in all possible worlds. Okay, and then if I say all bachelors can swim, and that statement is descriptive, I'm making a statement about the world around us. Okay, I can't just look at the words and determine if that statement is true or not. I have to actually go out in the world and test it. I have to grab bachelors and throw them in the water and see if they actually can swim. Now, if I grab a whole bunch of all the bachelors in the world and I throw them in the water, that would be a demonstration. So definitional is the first level, just all bachelors are unmarried men. That's a definitional statement. And then a descriptive statement would be all bachelors can swim. And then a demonstration would be actually grabbing all the bachelors in the world and throwing them in the water and seeing if they can swim. But that first statement, that first level, stand by, that first statement, that first level, we learned something, right? We learned how I'm using the word bachelor. We learned how, there be different uses of the word bachelor. That's just an invented convention for us. Like if I say I'm a bachelor, even though I'm happily married, I have a 4-year college degree. Well, it means something different in different contexts. That's why I said in this context, bachelor to me means unmarried man. So at that first just definitional level, you've learned something about the world around us. You've learned something about how I'm using language and the brevity codes we invent for talking about married men versus unmarried men. Sorry to cut you off.
What I was trying to get at, or what struck me is when you said then that we test. Now, as soon as you test something, it's become science, as far as I'm concerned. That you've gone from philosophy to science because you've added an experimental tool. So, give me the difference between analytic and descriptive again. This one always.
Analytic is, it's called the analytic synthetic distinction, and that's the difference in how we go about determining whether or not different kinds of statements are true. Some statements are purely analytic, in that we just analyze the words and we determine whether or not the statement is true just by analyzing the words. That would be all bachelors are unmarried men. A descriptive statement would be a synthetic statement, would be all bachelors can swim, or all bachelors are bald, or anything you're making a statement where you're trying to describe something in the world around you. And then the demonstration would be the science part, which I would maintain that science is a philosophy, or a better way to phrase it is science has a philosophy. When you want to learn things and test things about the world around you, you run experiments, you run controlled tests, and you have placebos and all that stuff that we like to use in the scientific method. But that is a philosophy in and of itself.
The testing is you're calling that a philosophy also?
No. Science is a philosophy. If you go to a college graduation, almost all of the diplomas say philosophy of XYZ, philosophy of arts, philosophy of this, philosophy. You love the knowledge of science if you're doing the work of science.
Yeah. I actually disagree with that concept, but
that's good. Disagreement is good. It makes things more interesting.
Having not been through a philosophy degree, I suppose I'm not standing on good grounds to do that. The position I have been holding for quite a while is that you cannot learn something new from philosophy alone for basically mental effort. However, when the tools of philosophy are essentially math and science, math and logic, and there are certain statements within both of those that are immutable. Essentially, 1 + 1 is always 2, and et cetera. So, given that you've got those tools to make philosophy up from, there's got to be. I would think that there are some certain things that you can combine to give you something new. I don't have a good example of that, and it's a very vague and general description. So I'm shifting to yes on this. So it's interesting. The audience is on no. I don't know. Well, let me see. Do we have calls? Let's talk about the. We don't have any calls yet, so let's put out a call for calls. If you are watching us, our lines are open. Please give us a call at 984-789-4787. And Wes, if you could roll the URL on the bottom of the screen, please. If you're calling outside of the United States, don't call that number because, well, you can call that number, but you're going to end up with a huge phone bill. So please don't do that. Get on a computer and use the URL. If you're in the United States, and you still can use that URL if you choose to do so. If you're on a computer with a mic and headphones and stuff, but please give us a call. And oops, someone's coming in. We'll let our screener work on that. I'm going to jump to one of our banner questions. We've got some questions that are unrelated to the topic, but there's useful at times like this. Let's see if I can find something interesting. We just talked about woke last week, so I'm not going to grab that one. Here's a good one for you, Eric. How do you define what truth is?
Well, there's lots of different theories of truth. Correspondence theory of truth. They're all escaping me right now, but generally, the consensus for what I've done, the limited studying I've done in philosophy, at the community college level, is that which comports with reality. That's what we always hear, is that which comports with reality. So, okay, the next question is usually, so how do I see this comporting with reality, and when do I know it when I see it?
Mm-hmm.
And like I like to say, you've heard me do this before. I just did a version of it earlier. Is there's different ways to get truth. Like there's descriptive truth, there's definitional truth, and then there's demonstrable truth.
Yeah, when we have these atheist conversations, I like to stay away from mathematical definitions and things like this, and pretty much just stick with the what comports with reality, what's consistent with reality.
I like to avoid truth. I stick with facts or accurate or reality in my own counter-apologetics, because truth is specifically with regards to Protestant Christianity in this country, it's a trigger word. They always treat truth with a capital T, and comes from Jesus, comes from Yahweh. That is the truth. God is the truth. I am what I am. Whatever it says in the Bible. So when they hear the word truth, that's something that they key in on, and now you're speaking that Christianese to them, and that's a path I don't usually want to go down.
Interesting. We have a caller I'm going to bring in. This is Barb from Illinois, who wants to talk about how to handle Jehovah's Witnesses at the door. See if I can get her in the room. Hello, Barb. You're on Let's Talk.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
Whoa, you're loud. Just fine.
Hello, Barb.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's for us to take care of. So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, and what I kind of wanted to talk about. I mean, am I talking clearly for you?
You're great. Yeah, you sound great. I can hear you just fine.
Okay. I'm all right. I'm not much of a philosopher, but I did want to tell people how to handle Jehovah's Witnesses who kind of will come at you if they see you. Like we have a pair of Jehovah's Witnesses that every time I go past the park, they would try to engage me in conversation, and they had their little portable mini library, of watchtower stuff and all of that. And the first couple of times I walked by them, they kept trying to engage. And so I took something in my bag as I was going to the post office, and it's my secret weapon. And when I met them, I pulled out my animal rights pamphlets, and they're filled with like slaughterhouse videos and slaughterhouse pictures and factory farm pictures. And I just held out my arm and I said, "This is reality. This is something important you could talk about." And I said, "This is real." And I handed it over, and each one of them took it. If you hold your arm straight out at them, they'll generally take it. And they didn't know what to say. And finally, one of the ladies said, "Oh, have you read some of our materials?" And I said, "Yes, I have." And she said, "Well, which ones?" And I said, "Well, the Watchtower stuff." I should have said that I read it in jail, because when you go to the jail in our town, they have all that Watchtower stuff sitting out and everything. It's really crazy. Wow. But that worked for a little while. Finally, they tried to say more, and they were like, it's constantly quoting the Bible. Their line of logic is to say, do a Bible quote to try to make sense. It's kind of like their facts for the Bible. And I said, I stopped them every single time. I said, you cannot use the Bible to verify the Bible. And then they didn't know what to say. They were just stuck because they didn't have anything but that. That's really all I have to say. I have other things. Well, you know what? Let me just say one other thing, and then I'll be done.
Well, no,
Um,
let me
I
react to
also,
that. Let me react to that before, because I think what you did is important, because when a lot of times I find when you talk to people like that, they've got their plan, right, of how they want to talk to you and what they want to talk and what they want to quote and all. And one of the challenges
Mhm.
I find is to get them to think outside their box or not restrict the conversation to what they want to talk about. So I like what you did. You got them, even just that little hesitation that they had of not knowing how to react was good, because you've tripped them up. And it's not like we're trying to fool people or anything. It's just, you're going to tell me something. Essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to make assertion after assertion after assertion, right? You're going to read phrases. You're going to say Jesus loves me and blah blah blah. It's just assertion, 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 and it's difficult to combat the assertions, because when you criticize what they say, they often don't even listen to you, and they just go on to make new assertions. So it is nice to be able to get them to stop the process, get out of the script, if you will, and to
Mhm.
think of something else, or think of a tangential thing, or whatever. So I like the way you did that. Eric, what do you think?
Oh, thanks.
For my money, I don't really seek out the guys who are standing there on the side of on the sidewalks in downtown areas with their Watchtower books. I do subscribe to the notion that I don't want to participate in somebody's abuse and continuing furtherance of their indoctrination cycle. If they come up to me, that's totally different, because now it's a consent sort of thing. I mean, you've heard me give this analogy before between the kiosk and the brick and mortar store. When I go out on the street and I've got a sign that says "Ask an Atheist," that's like me being the brick and mortar store, where you walk in, you're granting the salespeople permission to try to sell you things. But when you walk past the kiosks in malls, they reach out to you. They'll try to get into your space and say, "Hey, come buy my wares," right? Well, I don't want to get into people's faces. I don't want to get into their space. If they come to me, that's different, because they've granted me consent to talk about their ideas. If they're standing there on the side of the street, they're just, I feel bad for them. It's really sad, because they make them stand there all day long. I've read books about the JWs, about how it's very abusive, the way they make them stand there all day long, and they take all their money and they make them sell things, and it's really just sad. So I don't want to participate in that.
Barb, when they come to your door, do you answer those? Do you speak to them?
Um, we haven't had them come to the door for a long time. It was real. I was really talking mainly about the park, and they would see. I have to go to the post office every day, and once a week, they will try to engage me in conversation. And they are the ones starting it.
Yeah.
I agree. If they're just standing there, I'm not going to go over to them if they're just ignoring me, but they had been trying to lure me in, and especially that day, because I walked past them several times, and each time they tried. So that's why I did what I did. But yeah, it's like you always have people come up to me, and it seems like I'm a magnet for it. I don't know why, but like even in Texas, I was visiting my daughter. We went to a park, and this woman started talking about how phenomenal my daughter looked running, because she was running all over the place and all of that. And then all of a sudden she said, I want to speak to you from my heart and all of this. And she got into the religious stuff. And the main thing was, like, she kept saying, if I said something was in the Bible, like how hard to beat a slave and that kind of thing, she would say, it's not there. It's not there. And I said, yes, it is. I thought you have read the Bible. No, it's not there. And she kept that up a whole lot, and she ended it with, I believe deep, deep, deep in my heart, and that was a fact for her. I believe it's true, so deep in my heart. And it's like, I don't, no matter how deep you believe, that isn't really a fact, but that, she was so sincere, and I do feel sorry for them that way. But she ended with, of course, that I should read the Bible cover to cover. And I said, and you as well. And, they seem to come after me all the time.
Have you read the Bible to cover? And have you told them that?
No, I can't, because that would be lying. I have read, I read usually the skeptic things. And because if I try to read the Bible, I always get into and this person begat that person, and this person begat that person, and I get into all this really boring stuff, and I don't know. I didn't take to the Jesus character. I tried several times, and I thought, no, I'll just read the skeptic things and things that are more interesting, and how I like to read the history before the Bible, which can tell you how, like, why Jesus had the certain story that he had, because Inanna did it first, the goddess, and because of the way the sun looks like it's being totally still in the sky for 3 days and then starts to rise again, and all of those kinds of things. I like reading all that kind of thing. But you sit me down with a Bible, and I'm not going to get very far.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barb, just like you were saying, I mean, if they come up to you, then they've granted permission to talk about their ideas, and then it's a totally different ballgame. Me personally, I mean, Phil knows me pretty well. I'm a masochist for this conversation. I can't get enough of it. Well, for a long time, I couldn't get enough of it. So at that point, I will definitely engage with them. But I mean, I've got quite a bit of schooling and history and experience with counter-apologetic arguments. So they don't want to talk to me for very long. I've had them come to my door. And I talked to him for about 45 minutes one time. A very nice young man and his brother. But I talked to him for about 45 minutes, and I can't be sure about this, but I feel like I ended up on a list. They're like, "Don't go back to that guy's house. He's not going to be one that's going to be sold on this kind of stuff." So I'm a little disappointed about that, because I kind of like the conversation with those guys when they've granted you consent to talk about their ideas. But yeah, the second point I want to make, you were talking about the Bible, and what is it, Numbers, Phil, with all the, so and so begat so and so begat so and so.
I've read Kings or something.
I've read the Bible, call it essentially cover to cover, 4 times. There was a part of my life I thought I could learn it really well, but I'm never going to know it as well as somebody that just grew up in that indoctrination system. So I gave up on that pretty quickly. I feel like I know what I need to know about the Bible, but the point I wanted to make to you, Barb, is you can just skip those parts. Nobody's even going to know. You just skip right over all the begats and go on to the juicy parts.
Yeah, that's not where the conflict really is. in terms of what's inconsistencies and things that don't make sense. It's okay. We can take the begats as a single source of history, and that's fine to the degree that it's single source. But I was going to say that the thing that I do at this point, I probably answer the door about 50-50. Kind of depends on the mood that I'm in. What concerns me is when I see, more often than not, the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? They come in pairs. They come in 2 people, sometimes 3, but usually 2. And it's a younger one and an older one, right? Sort of a newbie in training kind of thing. And then
a master and an apprentice.
Yeah, the elder. So the first thing I think of is basically the younger person as sort of a newly trapped cult member kind of a thing. So as much as possible, I try to ignore the elder and speak directly to the younger person. And because I know if there's any chance of being able to make a point, or point out an inconsistency or a fallacy in whatever they're telling me, there's a better chance I can get the younger person to at least pause their thought for a second and notice that, than the elder who is pretty much trained to, look for these tricky things, like they tell you 1 + 1 is actually not 3. Well, don't believe that, whatever. So
that's an interesting tactic you bring up, is focusing on the younger person, because I took the opposite end of that strategy, and I focused on the older one, and I noticed that the younger one was watching the older one, because the younger one has this impression that, oh, this guy is my mentor, this guy's going to teach me how to do this. And when he sees this guy getting stumped and getting fumbled and really struggling through the arguments, by extension, that third person was the one that I really was reaching, even though I wasn't really speaking with him. We hear this all the time about, informal debates with audiences, or even on call-in shows. The person you're talking to is rarely, if ever, the person you reach. It's really the audience members. It's that third party, the indirect person who's watching that conversation take place. They're the ones who are sitting back there thinking, oh, so-and-so is going to wipe the floor with this guy. And then they get out there and they realize, these are really bad arguments. And I thought this guy was good at this. That happened to me with your buddy Kelly Clemenson. Some of his little minions came up to me on the street one night. They're like, you debated Kelly Clemenson. And I'm like, I'm like, yeah, he's nothing to be afraid of, I promise you. Seth Andrews on The Thinking Atheist tells a story about his deconversion phase when he was watching Christopher Hitchens, and I think it was Rabbi Shmuley, and he thought the rabbi was just gonna smoke Hitchens, and he watched the whole debate, and like I can't remember exactly what Seth says, but he's like, he stayed awake all night long, and he couldn't think of anything else about how bad Shmuley's arguments were, and then within a couple days, Seth had deconverted himself.
Oh, geez. Wow. How nice. Well, I wish I could have more of an influence on Kelly. Kelly used to be sort of my, I don't want to say
Project?
nemesis exactly, but well, no, we were sort of each other's project, if you want to put it that way. He's a very nice guy, but he doesn't believe in evolution. He's pretty much a Ken Ham clone, if you will. But Barb, what you were going to bring up another point? What was that?
Oh, that was really it. I will say one time we did have Jehovah's Witnesses who knocked on our door, and I was just getting home, and I saw them go around to the back of the house and look through our bedroom window to see if we
That's
were
invasive.
there. And that,
Wow.
sorry, what?
I said that is invasive.
Yeah.
Oh, that is what? I'm sorry.
Invasive.
I said invasive. That's
Oh
that's
yeah,
really,
very invasive.
Yeah.
Very invasive. And I got pretty mad. That's when my temper will flare, and I won't be quite as lovely and patient
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah. I mean, there are limits.
That just came into my head. I will probably get off the phone right now, you guys, because I have to take my dog out.
Okay.
They get this way. But I'll be back to watch the rest of your show.
Thank you much for calling, Barb, and then keep an eye on Let's Talk and call us anytime. We've got a nice collection of different people that will cover different subjects and stuff, and I'm really glad you called in. Please call again.
Thanks for the chat, Barb.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Oops. I almost dropped the screener. Didn't mean to do that. Okay. I had a thought, and now I've lost it, so I'll just move on.
So I was looking at the title of the show today, and I was thinking about some of the times where we've had good conversations about fallacies, specifically in the context of counter-apologetics. And I don't want to make this about you and me, Phil, but we've been friends for a long time now.
Yeah.
But a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we went to a philosophy roundtable down in Orange County. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And there were, I think, 4 or 5 believers who gave their testimonies, and each one of them used various arguments that we've all heard before. And I went around the room and kind of itemized all the errors they made in their thinking. You remember that?
Not specifically, but you remember the group. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
Those that might be.
I don't need to remember it. So tell the audience as much detail as you want, because they don't.
Sure, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. So if I start to become, if this becomes a monologue instead of a dialogue, then just cut me off.
I'll stop you.
Good. Okay, so they all told their stories, and the first one was her name was Tori, short for Victoria, and she gave a story about how the reason why she knows that God, I say Yahweh, she knows God is real is because she was in a really dark place in her life and she was really struggling, and then God came in and put heat and light in her life, and this put her in the mindset of, God is real, and that's why she believes. And then the next guy gave something to the effect of, my business was doing very, very poorly, and I prayed about it, and then my business started doing better. Therefore, God is real. I would say Yahweh is nonfiction, just for rhetorical purposes. And the last guy that I made a point to was the one who says, I've considered all these different possibilities about how something came to be, or how, what kind of explanations we have for X, Y, and Z. And he says, I eliminated this natural explanation, and that natural explanation, that explanation, and I'm only left over with this supernatural explanation. So I raised my hand and I say, hey, can I share some thoughts about what we've heard tonight? So I started with Tori, and I said, hey, Tori, thanks for sharing tonight. It's very appreciative to be so vulnerable. That's cool, but I want to talk about your ideas a little bit. And I said, okay, so I'm going to use an analogy. I apologize if it sounds rude, because I can only be so good at analogies. Maybe I'm just not that good at this one. But what if I told you that Batman put a watch on my wrist? And if you don't believe me, then look, here's the watch. See, this is the very watch. If you don't, you want to test it, you want to see if it's a watch, you can wear it yourself, see if it does all the things a watch is supposed to do. Now, do you believe me that Batman put the watch on Marcy? And she says, well, of course not. I says, well, good, you shouldn't believe me. And the reason why is because I'm showing you the wrong thing. I'm saying Batman did a thing, and then I'm showing you the thing. I'm appealing to the thing, right? You already believe that watches exist. You don't believe that Batman is nonfiction, right? So if I want to update your ontology about Batman being nonfiction, I can't just say Batman did a thing and show you the thing, right? So if you understand why you don't believe me about Batman and the watch, you understand perfectly well why I don't believe you about Yahweh and heat and light, because you're doing the exact same thing. I already believe that heat and light exist. Those are mundane claims. I experience heat and light almost every day of my life. But to appeal to those and say, oh, Yahweh put them there, is a fallacy known as affirming the consequent. It's when you're saying X did something and here is Y. Look, there's Y. I found Y. Therefore, X is real, right? That would be the formal version of affirming the consequent. That's what she did. I didn't name affirming the consequent to her because I think it would have gone over her head and I probably would have lost her at that point.
Yeah.
And then the next fella, his name was Tony. And I said, okay, so Tony.
Well, hold on before you go.
Sure.
Before you move on. So, because what comes into my mind is the idea. I forget what the phrase is, Stephen. Anyways, I can't remember what the list is. But when you've got a list of 4 different hypotheses for what could be causing this thing, and these 3 don't pan out, or at least you don't think them panning out, that does not mean that the 4th one is actually true, right? I mean, it only means
depends. It depends on what mode.
True.
It depends on what mode of inference you're using. If you're using an inductive mode of inference, then that's correct. You don't know that 4th one did it. But if you've narrowed it down to a list of possible candidate explanations, and you know that it is one of the candidate explanations, if you've removed the other 5 candidates, the 6th answer is the leftover answer. That's deduction. You've done a deductive mode of inference, which is the gold standard. That's as good as it gets. You give me a valid, sound, and complete deductive syllogism, and I would be a raving lunatic to reject it.
Well, but at the very least, there is the possibility of one more that you didn't think of or that you're unaware of.
That's if you're still using the inductive mode of inference. If you're using a deductive mode, then you have exhausted the list, and you're saying it's the example I always use is the die, right? Not dice, because dice is plural, just die, right? So if I show you a die in my hand, right, and it's got 6 sides, it's got white with black dots on it, right? And it's the standard die, no funny business, it's not weighted. It's the kind of die you would get like in a Yahtzee set at Target, right? Okay, so for my next trick, I'm going to take this die and I'm going to flip it up in the air. I'm going to give it a good spin. It's going to bounce and careen off the floor, maybe somebody's leg or whatever. And then you and I are going to answer a question about this die. We're going to get on the floor and we're going to say what side of the die is touching the ground, touching the floor, whatever side is resting down. The side you can't see. Well, you only have one mechanism to answer this. If I say you can't touch the die, pick it up and look at it, the other way you can do that is you can look at all the sides that you can see. You eliminate those from the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. If you see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you know the right answer is 6, right?
Yeah. But
okay, so that is a deductive mode of inference. But what
I'm seeing is a problem with the analogy, because this is we're usually talking about an argument where people decide that God's the reason, right? So it's not. Your description of what the die is good and it does work, but when we don't really know what the correct thing is, when we don't know that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let me see if I can. This comes to mind. If we take the same 6-sided die with no numbers on it, okay, and the options for what numbers will be on this die are infinite, and I show you the die just like you said with different numbers on them, and they're all sorts of different ranges. They're all, there's big numbers, there's little numbers. The question now becomes, what's on the bottom side that you can't see? You cannot use the deductive process there, because that bottom one has no reason to know. That's even not a perfect analogy, because I'm telling you there is a number down there. There may even not be a number. So we can leave that as an option too. There is no answer. There's answers we are unaware of. Maybe there's a symbol down there or some other category that we didn't even think of. So to me, it doesn't even matter how many options you have. There's always something you didn't think about, and there's got to be at least one of those, or there probably is at least one of those, if not, thousands of those. There is one that you're completely unaware of, that you're not even capable of being aware of. So, as the scale of our intellect. So right there, you've made it at best a 1 in 3 decision, a 1 in 3 option. So for someone to say that God, as one of those 3 last ones, is the most likely, no, it's like at best it's 1 in 3, at best. Minority.
Deduction assumes you've already done the inductive step. You have to induct before you can deduct. It's like a bank account. You have to deposit before you can withdraw. You can't just open a bank account and say, I'd like to withdraw $1 million. You have to deposit that first, okay? You have to induct your answers, a natural explanation, another natural explanation, and a supernatural explanation. That's where I'm still at. I haven't seen anybody induct with commensurate evidence any supernatural explanation. So you have to do that first. J. Warner Wallace is famous for this. Like, oh, I eliminated this natural explanation. You must be left over with a supernatural explanation. Well, you never inducted the supernatural explanation in the first place. That's what you need to do first. That's why I was very careful in the analogy to say, oh, look, I've got 6 sides in Yahtzee and Target and white and black, the whole 9 yards. And then I said, for my next trick, everything at that point on, all that was the deductive step, because we've already accomplished the inductive step, which supernatural religious apologists have not done with any sort of supernatural claim or deity or being or divine source or whatever. They've never inducted something, so you can't just start deducting natural sources and go, oh, well, we're just left over with a supernatural source. You have to induct that supernatural source first.
Good point. Good point. There's a question from the audience. Let's pull in that. This is from Cat the Humanist. What are some of the most common fallacies that you've run into when countering apologetics?
I think that all apologetics is a subset of begging the question or circular reasoning or petitio principii. If you want to sound smart and say it in Latin, you're petitioning the principle is what it means, right? So, like my explanation of the guy earlier at the philosophy roundtable, where he said my business was doing poorly and then I prayed about it, my business started doing better. Well, the word pray or prayer, I asked him what it meant. When you say that word, what do you mean by that? Because you may mean something different than I do. And he said, praying is when you fellowship with God, capital G God. And I said, okay, so could we say that it's talking to God? It's talking to Yahweh? And he goes, yeah, so praying is talking to Yahweh. Okay, so the very phrase praying or talking to Yahweh presumes that Yahweh is something you can talk to, which begs the question, because between you and I, we have a question that's unsettled. Like you and I, we talk about Toyota. We think Toyota exists. That question is settled. Okay, so Yahweh, is Yahweh fiction or nonfiction? Between you and I think that question is settled. But between me and this supernatural religious apologist, that question was not settled. So he still needs to solve that question, answer that question between us. He cannot appeal to the question to solve the question. It's circular reasoning. All for my money, I think all supernatural religious apologists starts with circular reasoning, begging the question, and then from there you get argument from ignorance. God of the gaps is a subset. Affirming the consequent is very, very big. It happens all the time. People it is just replete amongst this conversation of affirming the consequent.
The one that I run into the most is the look at the trees thing. Look, how do you explain all this complexity? How did you get here? How did we get here? And then that's
so. But you have to name the fallacy, because that's the question, right, Phil? So what fallacy is that?
Well, I don't know all the fallacy names, and I can't rattle them off. And frankly, I'm to a degree not interested in that, because I don't. Let me. How can I say this? When I started becoming aware of fallacies, and maybe Oz will appreciate this a little bit. It was a lot of terminology, and it's hard to stick in my head all this different terminologies. If you name a particular fallacy, I cannot just give it to you. It's not in my head, and I'm to a degree not interested in doing that. So I'm more concerned with seeing the problems line by line in the logic, and it's also and dealing with those, and it's also to the point that we've both had people where you see it online, especially you don't see it so much in person. At least they don't say it in person, but online they say it a lot. Where if you do something like, say, affirming the consequent, they'll say, "Oh, you're just trying to look smart." So I prefer to avoid using the fallacy terms, and sort of verbalizing them in terms of what the actual problem is with the particular line that they're talking about. So you asked me these, and I won't be able to repeat them to you.
I couldn't agree more. You have to know your audience, and some audiences, if it's an academic philosophical environment, then naming the fallacies is perfectly appropriate. But just like I was describing to you at the philosophy roundtable that you and I went to down in Orange County a few years ago, I didn't name the fallacies. I just used examples and showed people the error they were making by using counterexamples, using the same fallacies they were using, and showing them that this doesn't convince you. It's because it's fallacious. I can tell you the names of them if you want. Yeah. But it didn't make a difference. It wouldn't have helped their understanding is to do that. It has been my experience that the name of the fallacy I was looking for earlier, a name of the fallacy really would be equivocation. They're equivocating the kind, when you say look at the trees, they're equivocating or they're conflating different kinds of design, because it is appropriate to say that an iPhone or a car is designed. It's teleos. It's designed by an intelligent agent. A person thought about a purpose to a watch or an iPhone or a car, and they designed it for that purpose, right? Well, then that's teleological designs. Your teleological arguments. Well, there's also teleonomic.
Give me the definition of teleo.
I think it's purpose. I'm not exactly. I have to look it up, but I think it's purpose. Teleological would be a person or a mind that set out with a goal to design something, right? This is, you hear the watchmaker. Yeah, we hear in the chat. I see watchmaker. William Paley's watchmaker argument. Yeah, but the other end of that, with intention. The other end of that, the conflation or the equivocation would be they're conflating different kinds of design. Okay, so the other kinds of design, we would say something like teleonomic design. So you look at a sandcastle. Somebody built a sandcastle with teleologic intent, right? But then you look at a sandbar or a snowman, right? Those things were built by, a snowdrift or a sandbar. Those things were built just by the natural forces of nature. They were designed by the natural forces of nature. That's teleonomic design versus teleologic design. So they're making, they're conflating or they're equivocating between different kinds of a design.
Yeah, that's a distinction. I still need to get stronger in my head. I usually go for, that usually tells me when they say things like, look at the complexity of the trees, that they just don't have much scientific knowledge, because it's not difficult if you've had, and this is why I advocate all the time for, I think we should have science in 4 years, all 4 years of high school. If you understand basic physics, basic chemistry, and how complexity grows over time in an open environment, I don't have a problem seeing complexity. It makes perfect sense. I mean, to some degree, it seems like it's essentially inevitable that given the set of laws of physics, and we can talk about that as a different subject, but given the set of laws of physics that we have, these things were going to happen. And the fact that you're not noticing that the thing that exists because it took 6 million steps to go from here to there, I can get you to recognize step 1 and step 2 and step 300 and 301, but you're not noticing that full range to get there. Seems to be a lot of the answer that you need to deal with. Let's see, you've got another question here from Dorsey Hussein. I pull this up. I read The Case for Christ when I was a Christian, and even back then I thought, this is not evidence when you just interview pastors and believers. Exactly. And this is what concerned me the most when I read this, is that it's advertised, and it's advertised as a true looking at both sides exercise. And everybody who has described it to me as a Christian totally missed that. I mean, they get that. They think it's balancing both sides and it's coming to the Christ side, and they have no clue that there's not a scientist in there, that these are all apologists. So what you give somebody the benefit of the doubt initially. So I would think of this guy as someone who was really doing what he considered to be a good thing. But when he presents it that way, now it looks like a scam. And I'm sorry, I don't know if it is a scam or not, but that's what the guy ended up publishing, something that looks like a scam.
Yeah, I still maintain. I think that Lee Strobel, his intent was just to save his marriage. His wife had a radical conversion experience, and they were living in Houston. I think they still live in Houston now, which is a very evangelical environment. And to go along, to get along in a lot of places like Houston, you pretty much have to go to church and have to be part of that tribe.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to get divorced from his wife, so he went out to go, oh, look at me, I've investigated this objectively, and what do you know, it's totally true. And it is really disheartening when you talk to people at the street level and they say, oh, you should read, Lee Strobel, or oh, you should read J. Warner Wallace, or you should listen to Ray Comfort. These guys really know what they're talking about. And then, of course, just like our friend Dorothy is saying here, is it's just all one-sided, stacking the deck in your favor.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Let's unstart that one, because that one is done now. We're about midway, so let's do a little bit of commercial work here. I want to first off, if you guys, for those of you who are relatively new here or haven't been watching Skeptic Haven for a while, we just passed our 2,000 subscriber anniversary. We've got a show, did a show last week on that, just having fun with it. Thank you so much for all the support you've given us over the almost 2 years that it took us to get to this point. It's been a lot of work. Wes has been the heart and soul of this from the beginning. Wes Sturdivant, or Wes the producer Wes, however you know him. Give him full credit for being here the entire time. We are now a team of about 20 volunteers. All of this is volunteer work. We do it for what we think is for the benefit of society, for the benefit of education, for having a place that we can come together. Skeptic Haven is a place that is a safe place for LGBT, for trans, for deconstructing people. So like and subscribe, listen to all our different shows. We've got 5 different shows right now. So check out our catalog and support us if you can. Consider supporting us. We do have a Patreon. Let's put up the Patreon for a bit while I'm talking about this piece of it. We do have a Patreon channel, and we've got, this is one of our prizes now. This will get you can get one of these wonderful little beautiful mugs, and actually they're really nice because I wanted to give people something good and not tiny and cheap. This is for a $10 monthly donation, but you can give as little as $3. We are on Instagram. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook public page for those who want to get into some debating. We have a private group for those who don't want to be debating but want that safe space. We are on TikTok and a lot of activity on Twitter. And I will say I'm thrilled this past week because our Instagram is a bit of a hard platform to grow on, but we had a couple of breakout posts, and I was thrilled. A couple of weeks ago, we had one that went to about 40,000 views, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. And then 2 weeks later, we had one that hit 1.2 million views, and like a little over 250,000 likes, and all the comments. It was just a thrill. So thank you for everybody for interacting on those pages. There's good content there. I also put the links for the show as just a reminder, but I want to make sure there's content between the links, so it's just not like a channel of links for you. Give us a call, please. I still don't have a caller at 984-789-4787. If you are outside of the United States, please use the URL so you don't end up with a $100 phone bill or whatever it costs you. So I'm going to go to another one of these banners. Let's just kind of mix it up here. Now, these are unrelated to our topic. And if you're out there thinking about calling, you do not have to call on the topic. That gives us something to get started with and to talk about a little bit. But you can call about anything. So feel free to call about anything here. Okay. So Eric, someone just randomly comes up to us at one of our events or one of these call-in shows and says, I have a terrible fear of going to hell. Will that ever disappear, or how do I deal with it? How do you talk about that?
Yeah, that is just not my area of expertise. I'm very fortunate. I was never raised with a religious upbringing. Everything was very secular for me. Are you okay, buddy? Yeah.
Give me a second to cough.
From my experience talking to people who were raised, indoctrinated into these belief systems, it seems to me that it never goes away, but it dulls over time. I have zero fear of going to hell in the exact same way you have zero fear of being eaten by a werewolf, because you don't believe werewolves exist. I don't believe hell exists outside of just our concepts inside of our head, okay? So I have zero fear of going there, but that's a privilege of mine I don't have to be encumbered with because I was never raised in that environment. So somebody who was raised that way and then deconverted themselves may have a better answer for that question, because I'm the guy that didn't have to deal with that and deconstruct that myself.
Oops, didn't mean to do that. Well, you're lucky. That's good. As you know,
I recognize that's a privilege for sure.
We all know a lot of people that were come to atheism through theism or from theism, so they do have to deal with this. I was raised Catholic, not the most, hell burdening religion out there. That's they don't typically, and certainly my parents didn't typically drill that into us. So I didn't have a strong fear of it, although certainly I know of others who did. But I will say that when I was in my early 20s, I went through a period of fear of death, which is sort of a similar subject. And I kind of obsessed on it for a little bit. I don't know if you guys remember, some of you who are older in this audience will remember the Michael J. Fox episode, the special episode of that family show he was on, where it was a comedy show, but they did this special dramatic episode of one of his friends had committed suicide, and it caused him, the Keaton character, to obsess on death and to really kind of face it. And I don't remember if that's what triggered it, but it was right in that period of time for me. And that fear of death, it was pretty strong. And I will tell you then, having become an atheist over the 30 or so years beyond that, the fear of hell or the fear of death, there's value to dealing with it as a reality, not the hell part, because that doesn't exist, but that'll dissipate, like Eric said, over time, perhaps long time, decades. But the fear of death, it also will dissipate. It's like this thing is out there in the death case, and there's a maturity to being able to accept that, and it becomes less and less and less and less and less. And at some point, you realize that, I am living this life and having my turn at being aware of my own consciousness and my own existence. That's a pleasure in of itself. I don't want to use the word like gift or any sort of concept like that, because it's not given to me, because that implies a giver. But it does wear down, and it will wear down. It will take time, and like I say, sometimes it'll take a long time.
Well, the threat of hell is a very effective mechanism used by religions to indoctrinate people. And there's, hell is not one thing from Christianity and Judaism. Hell is a concept that we find in lots of other religions. It's very pervasive in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, but it's not unique to that. And they use it because it's effective. So part of that, it being effective, is its longevity, is it's going to unfortunately stay with you for a long time, which I would interpret that, if somebody was trying to control my mind and make me afraid of something, as more reason to believe that it's not true, because if it was true, you wouldn't have to threaten me into believing it.
Mm-hmm. This brings to mind a difficult question to ask. So I'm going to throw it out there. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, and this is something that's the opinion seems to be shifting through this generation. We'll see well, we won't see, every generation will see. The question of, is indoctrinating a child with the concept and fear of hell child abuse? Do you have any reaction to that?
Yes, I've addressed this a lot in online conversations, and in some ways I say yes, and in some ways I say no. I mean, I could make a case either way. I think if you held a gun to my head, overall I would say yes, it is. If I tell you to go clean your room, or I'm going to beat you with a stick, that is abuse. If I tell you, if you don't believe that Yeshua rose from the dead, as described in the Bible, otherwise you're going to burn for all eternity, it is just as much abuse to say I'm going to beat you with a stick. So in a very simply stated way, I think the answer is yes. But it's also kind of indicative of the environment that religious parents grew up in themselves. So they're just propagating that from one generation to the next. So are they consciously abusing their kids? No, but it still constitutes as abuse.
Yeah. I'm similarly in that sort of shifting mode. I personally, even though occasionally I'll see posts on it that go on our channel, because some people do have that position, I'm not quite ready to go there, that calling it abuse, and pretty much for the reason you just said, Eric, is that I really perceive the parents as victims of that culture themselves.
Exactly.
And they're just for continuing that cycle. So I'm not ready to consider that abuse in that sense. I do think that at some point in the future, and I have no idea, generations, 2 generations, 1,000 years down the road, looking back, it will be considered abuse. How could those people have possibly done that to their kids down the road?
Looks like there's a call.
We have a new caller. This is Jeff from Los Angeles. He has some comments to say about the going to hell. Jeff, welcome to Let's Talk.
Hello, Jeff.
Hi. I was trying to just add in some commentary on that idea that people are deeply afraid of going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience, I'm not very good myself at answering, because, like, I am not afraid of werewolves either, as Eric brought up. But this occasion has popped up repeatedly on recovering from religion chats.
Mm.
And what happens while we're chatting, and these go on for a couple hours, and frequently the people who have expressed that fear will chime back in and say, wow, I feel much better having community and you people seem fine people and nice people and generous people, and you're not afraid of going to hell. And so maybe I'm going to eventually feel comfortable like that. And those recovering from religion chats are very particularly helpful for them. I just wanted to throw that in. So if anybody here who runs into somebody who expresses that fear, send them to recovering from religion.
That's a good point. I like how you brought up, Jeff, how we can model the change we want to see in the world. We can be examples to people in being, unapologetic about our lack of a fear of supernatural threats like hell. I met a guy at one of our market nights many years ago. His name was John, and just being nice to him, and he walked up and asked me a question about hell, and I gave him essentially the same canned response of, I'm not afraid of going to hell, in the same way you're not afraid of being eaten by a werewolf, because those two things are purely fictional. And just because I was nice to him and I answered that question so succinctly for him, he came back a couple years later and he's like, this is the guy, pointing at me, he's like, this is the guy who helped me deconvert from Christianity, because I grew up in my entire life terrified of hell. But then we were talking about how it sticks with us for a long period of time, or people who were raised in those indoctrination systems. It's funny because over the years, he friended me on social media, and then he would unfriend me, and then he would friend me again, and then unfriend me and friend me again. And he told me when I bumped into him again at one of the market nights, he said that being my friend was like admitting that he was not afraid of hell, but it would still stick with him, like residually. He couldn't get rid of it. So he would unfriend me and be like, well, just on the safe side, Pascal's wager, I'll just unfriend Eric. And then he would friend me again 6 months later. And I kind of got to watch him go through that cycle.
What a feeling that must be. That's cool. I remember that guy that he came to like a year later and said, "You're the guy."
It was a full year. Yeah, he was beaming. He was so excited. I was talking to somebody else, and he was pointing at me like, "This is the guy that helped me walk away from Christianity."
What an amazing feeling.
I've had that many times. I stopped counting it somewhere in the 20s where somebody told me I was the reason why. But it was never the person I was talking to, like we were talking earlier. It's always the third party, that indirect person who's watching the conversation take place. Which is, it's not necessarily my goal. I'm not trying to deconvert people. I say my goal is to help you accomplish your goals. And if you want, more accurate ideas in your head than inaccurate ideas in your head, then I want to help you accomplish those goals. The analogy I've used in the past is the Nigerian prince. I think you've probably heard me say this once or twice. If you found out tomorrow that the person you love most in the world, your best friend, your spouse, your sibling, your child, your parent, whoever it is, the person you love most in the world, you found out they were sending $1,000 a month to someone they met online claiming to be a Nigerian prince, how would you feel about that? Me personally, I would be apoplectic, right? I would be beside myself. I would reach out to this person and I would instantly explain to them, hey, this is a scam. This is a known scam. You are being bamboozled right now because I care about that person and I don't want them to be taken advantage of, right? Well, in a similar way, not in the exact same way, but I love everyone. I consider myself a humanist. I love everyone to a certain degree that when they are being bamboozled, I take personal umbrage with that. So I engage in this conversation. I study it. I take philosophy classes, and I help host shows like this as of today because I care about my fellow man. And if you cared about the person you love most being taken advantage of by a Nigerian prince, and you would have a conversation with them to help them realize they're being bamboozled, you understand why I engage in these conversations.
So how do you deal with that from the other side when they come to you and say, "I'm saving your soul, so I'm doing this thing that is very uncomfortable to you because it's for the greater good. I'm saving your soul."
I am very glad, and I appreciate the attempt. Because we just found common ground. I like to find common ground with my interlocutors, and that we just found common ground because we both want the other person to stop being bamboozled. You think I'm being bamboozled, maybe by Lucifer or Satan or the devil or whoever, I'm being bamboozled somehow. I think you're being bamboozled by your priest, your preacher, the padre, whoever it may be. We both agree that we want the other one to stop being bamboozled. So how do we go about determining what's the best method? What's the best process to determine who is right and who is wrong? For me, okay, I think that the best way to do that is to use critical thinking, logical formalism, analytic philosophy, and the methods of methodological naturalism, science. Mm-hmm. That's how I go about determining the best ideas, depending on the discipline.
Good. That's interesting.
Answer your own question. How do you deal with that when somebody walks up and says, "Hey, I think that your soul is in danger, and I'm worried about you. I want to help save you."
Yeah, I recognize the good intention to it. I am. It does stunt me a little bit because it's a little tougher for me to know where to go next, especially when. I guess that's when I go to trying to get them out of the box of thinking within just the Christian worldview. But at the very least, I want them to be willing to accept the idea that we can live together in peace. Even though I know what you're doing is, to you, a crucially important thing. You feel like you're more than saving a life because it's eternity, right? From their perspective, it's eternity. But when we have these opposite views, at some point, you can take the position, the theist can take the position, well, I better kill this atheist because he's infecting the world, right? And I can take the same logical position that I might as well kill this other guy because he's infecting the world. That doesn't help. We really need to learn to coexist at the very least. And it's an interesting, now that I think of it, because last night at the booth, this pastor came over and we had this discussion, where they often just talk at you kind of a thing. And it was friendly, and I said, "You're nice. You're a good guy. You have good intentions," and that was kind of the end of it. And the guy I was with afterwards said, "This guy was here 2 weeks ago when you weren't here, and we have these pamphlets on the table on the side. He said he took all your pamphlets, or he tried to take all your pamphlets, so that we couldn't."
Oh, and like throw them in the trash so you couldn't infect the world.
So we couldn't infect the world, and that made me mad. That pissed me off. But he was already gone at that point. But
Yeah,
no,
I mean, if I engage with somebody who is trying to help save my soul, then I mean, we are allies in one respect, that we both want accurate ideas about the world. So now that we're allies, now that we're on the same team, let's go about determining what the best method is to figure out what the facts are and how to get as many facts in my head as possible and expunge as many wrong ideas in my head as possible.
I like that common ground. I like that. Comment from the audience. This is from Jesse. What helped me to deconstruct more than atheists' arguments were the fallacies used in those of apologists. Yeah, I mean, again, I was shocked to learn how weak the arguments really are, and how historically repetitive they are. It seems to me that all these arguments have been rebutted probably 100 years ago.
Thousands. I mean, Aristotle was working on this. He's not the first one either.
Yeah. So
that's a good point, Jesse. I was having a conversation with the coach for a long time. His dad was a pastor, and he grew up, and we were in close proximity for many, many hours at one point. And I realized that we'd both been having this conversation for 10 hours. But he was like, "Okay, I'm going to make this case to you." And I said, "Okay, let me stop you. Before you do, can you make the case without using fallacies?" And he thought about it, and he scratched his chin, and he says, "No, I can't." And I said, well, with all due respect, I'm not interested, because I'm not going to have ideas in my head that require fallacies. Because now that I know what they are, and I can name them, and I can give you counterexamples why we shouldn't use them and explain them to you in detail, I can't hold an idea in my head that is fallacious, knowingly, consciously. And I think that reached him a little bit. We haven't really spoken much since. We've been kind of in separate working environments since then. But I did make that point to him, that if you can't make this case without fallacies, that you're never going to convince me. And he acknowledged he could only make the case by using fallacious reasoning, which I thought was very telling about his position.
that is interesting. I have a similar reaction to statements and assertions. If you're making an argument that is just one assertion after another, God loves you, if you don't believe him, if you don't believe in God, you're not trying hard enough, that kind of thing. And I try to make them notice that what they are doing is making assertions. So at the very least, let's just stop on one of the assertions and try to analyze that point. And that's when it becomes, depending on the type of person, often difficult, because they tend to not listen to you and continue to cycle around the same.
It's a monologue masquerading as a dialogue.
Yeah. Or if you do make a point, rather than say, "Oh yeah, okay," they literally without hesitation just go on to an entirely different point. So,
well, they're coached, they're taught in the pews how to get around points that are made well against their case. And they give them lots and lots of arguments and lots of tools, and they don't. When you show them why one argument doesn't work, they just immediately flex to a different argument. It's like, no, hold on a second. Are you acknowledging that the last argument you gave me wasn't going to cut the mustard? But they almost can't hear at that point, because they just want to get to the next little rhetorical point.
Yeah, and this is the part of my concern with the number of people coming out of Christian colleges these days. I looked it up a couple years ago. It was over 1 million graduates a year, and when you've got the requirements, like you say, you've got to commit going in that you're not going to. Well, number one, you're required to take apologetic courses, even if you're there for for become an insurance person or study history or whatever it is, completely unrelated to religion. And then, of course, half of the point of Bible study is to deepen the faith or to counter apologetics. Got a question from, is Danny or Donnie? It's Danny. I have a question. Is science enough to seek the truth, or should philosophy work along with science? What do you think, Eric?
It depends on what kind of answer you're searching for. If you're searching for an answer about the world around us, the physical world around us, you're going to need to run experiments. You're going to need to run tests. You're going to have to have controlled experiments. If you're just trying to figure out mind stuff, stuff that simply exists inside of our own head as concepts, then philosophy is the right tool to use. Again, I think of science as a philosophy, or science has a philosophy. It is one way of examining the world around us. So in some ways they work in concert, and in some ways they're separate.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give a little bit more leeway on this one. First off, should philosophy work along with science? I mean, philosophy, first off, is a good thing. I think we all agree it's a good thing. It is a unique tool where essentially there are very limited rules, right? You've got the rules of logic, you've got the rules of math in there. You typically have at least one observation to go by, but you're perfectly allowed to just completely come up with some new concept and work the logic on that. But it is a tool that does not have restrictions demanded on it. You are allowed to consider and think of anything. And that is a valuable, valid thing to have. It allows us to think outside the box and ask questions that we otherwise wouldn't ask. So I think of it as a tool to generate hypotheses, essentially. Now, once you've got a hypothesis, I think philosophy is problematic because you cannot take it beyond that point. Because once you've got a hypothesis, you then, if you're going to determine if it's true, you're going to have to get evidential, because you've already done the logic work. Assuming you've made no fallacious errors, there are no fallacies. There's nothing that's knowingly incorrect or, logically incorrect. So that after that, you need to add science to go further. But I will go ahead, Eric.
In this regard, just looking at the exact verbiage of this question from Danny here, it says, "Is science enough to seek the truth, or should philosophy work along with science?" If I asked the same question, but instead of the word philosophy, I said counting, is science enough to seek the truth, or should counting work along with science? Counting is just a tool. Math is just a tool we use within science. One of the ways we express our scientific ideas is with the tool of mathematics, counting, multiplication, division, arithmetic. Science is philosophy is one of the tools we use when we want to go out and run experiments on the world around us. When I say, hey, I'm going to get really objective about my ideas, and I really want to know what is going on in the world around me, the physical world around me, I'm taking a philosophical stance, and I'm going out into the world around me, and I'm going to run experiments. So philosophy is a tool we use in science. Science is not really a tool we use in philosophy, because philosophy is really just mind stuff. But I would maintain personally that there is no science-free philosophy, because science is a philosophy, or has a philosophy.
I do want to point out that philosophy is essentially used at two different points in the scientific method. It is typically used at the beginning. You base it on something, but again, you could base it on just a mental concept. So let's just start there. And then you determine what experiment can I devise to test this hypothesis. Once you've done that experiment, you have to interpret it. So that interpretation is essentially philosophy again. Anytime you're using just logic, there's a bit of I consider that philosophy too. But to be perfectly fair here, let's just say that a supernatural realm, and I'll keep it vague like that, does exist. And it is supernatural. It is unnatural. Physics cannot touch it. Science cannot touch it. Philosophy does not give you the ability to know that thing is true. It may be there. We may mentally come up with descriptions of this, but essentially we can only create a hypothesis of that supernatural location, of that supernatural entity, action, whatever it is, force. We have no ability to contact it. We have none. So when people come along and say that they are convinced of such things, when they have no justification to make that leap beyond hypothesis, that's when I have a problem. Science does not disprove that and cannot disprove that, but philosophy cannot prove it or disprove it.
Philosophy can only tell us what's true about mind stuff, about concept stuff, things that exist inside of our heads, the social conventions, the languages we share amongst each other, the way we talk about things, all that purely mind stuff. And we can learn things that are true just based upon mind stuff alone. If you want to learn things about the world around you, that's when you're going to have to start cutting and measuring and experimenting and running the scientific method.
But do you agree with me, or am I missing something?
No, I agree.
In terms of a supernatural location, if it did indeed exist.
I agree. The only issue I would propose with the way you phrased it is, as soon as I could engage with it, as soon as I can have access to it, it stops being supernatural. Unless you give me some sort of supernatural mechanism, unless you give me supernatural senses. Because as far as I'm aware, I only have natural senses. So if I could engage with a quote unquote supernatural realm, that realm instantly stops being supernatural because now my natural senses are the only way I have to take that data in.
Exactly. It becomes science. Just the same way that homeopathy or herbal medicines or something like that. You can call it have a mystical benefit, but as soon as we discover the chemical that's working or something, it is now medicine, So, but thank you for that question. Let me drop that one off. I could go to the board. I've got one more question here. Phone lines are still open. I'd like to get one more call in this last half hour here. Give us a call, please, at 984-789-4787. We are talking about fallacious philosophy, but we've done a fair amount of that so far. So on any topic of interest to you is perfectly fine. Where's my start question? Dorothy is back. Ooh, this is interesting and completely different. Do you guys consider yourselves patriots? How do you feel about posting the American flag today? I feel nervous when I see large flags moving in the front yards of my neighborhood. Politics.
I think that's a really... Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I was just going to put a little bit of a disclaimer that we are sort of a nonpartisan here, even though we obviously have some more progressive opinions. So this is just our opinions. But go ahead, Eric.
I've had the same hesitation in the last 5 or 6 years, Dorothy, because we have had one side of the political spectrum really aggressively kind of co-opting the symbols of patriotism, and it's can be a little unnerving because if you're displaying those symbols, people will make certain assumptions about you, or you'll be sending a message that you may feel like you're sending a message you don't actually intend upon sending. My initial inclination in this space is to resist that by not being afraid, if the situation is appropriate, to not let them control those symbols. Because that's kind of the goal, is if you're an American, then you agree with this side of the political aisle. Well, no, American means it represents all of us. That symbol represents all of us, not just one political side of the aisle. So I can totally understand and empathize with your reluctance to show that patriotism. But the way I feel personally for me is there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. I definitely consider myself a patriot. I think that the founding ideals of our secular forefathers are genuinely unique and special, and I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a space where I wasn't forced to be religious or burned at the stake, which is something I could have been, or thrown off a building in certain countries because I didn't agree with the status quo of the environment of the civilization that I lived in. So I'm very fortunate for that. But nationalism, I think, is patriotism to me is about being proud of who you are. Nationalism is more about being proud of who you aren't, which to me is kind of gross. So when I see people of a certain political persuasion trying to dominate that space of patriotic symbols, I look at that I may be stereotyping, but that feels more like nationalism to me. But when I do it, the way I rationalize that is it feels like patriotism when I do it. Hope that answers your question. But yes, I do consider myself a patriot in that way. And I'm unique also, not to dominate the conversation, but I'm unique also in that I'm in the military. So I have to wear a U.S. flag on my uniform when I go show up. So when I wear it on my uniform, it absolutely has no connotations of of partisanship or the acrimony that we have in our current political dialogue.
Yeah. And for me, I very much consider myself patriot. I am not uncomfortable with displaying the American flag. We do that with some frequency. I will rotate it with. I just don't have two spots, so I just haven't really thought about it. But I will put up the American flag on 4th of July and other holidays. Certainly Flag Day is obvious, and sometimes just for the heck of it, just because it's it's come to mind. We will also put up a rainbow flag for LGBT support and other types of things. I don't want to be interpreted to be extreme about it, so it's not like I'm going to plaster my yard and with all sorts of things like that. But it is something that in this country, I don't think we can allow or should try not to allow our pretty clear Constitution to be interpreted in a way that it's not intended to be interpreted. It's pretty clear that this was supposed to be, and Eric, you know the history better than I do, but it was supposed to be a country that was created to prevent it becoming monarchical or authoritarian like some of the European stuff that's prior to the 1500s and such. So I'm very proud of our flag, and I fly it proudly. So.
Yeah, I think there's a comment here from Kat the Humanist that says, I have a shirt with a flag on it and have worn it as an FU, you don't own it. I was trying to say essentially the same thing, Kat. You expressed it very well, but I was trying to say it a little more diplomatically.
Yeah, me too.
I will say as well that it was comforting to see that when Joe Biden won the election in 2020, that during his inauguration, I saw plenty of American flags being waved, and they were not afraid to include that as part of their iconography for their celebrations, which I thought was exactly what we should be doing, because, like I said, nobody owns that except for Americans own that, and the Canadians own their maple leaves, and the Germans own their black and red and orange or yellow or whatever color it is. There's nothing wrong with patriotism. I think when it gets gross for me is nationalism, which I explained a moment ago. Should we address the super chat? They're trying to get us to mention.
Yeah, give me 1 second,
Sure,
and I will bring up the super chat because there's one point I wanted to make on nationalism. I use an analogy on this one. It's fine to be nationalistic. We should all be proud of our countries, but I think of the analogy of being like a sports fan. When you're a sports fan, you like this. You like the team of your city, right? You're loyal. You're nationalistic in that sense to that team, but you like the sport, and you like the people in the sport. So when you become too focused on your own nation, you shouldn't turn it into a zero-sum game. You got to remember that you care about other people, even though, you prefer your country and you like to cheer for your country. That doesn't mean you need to put down other teams and other countries.
Cheer when they fail, or cheer when their star player gets hurt. Like I play a metric ton of golf, and it is considered very tacky for you to celebrate when one of your opponents hits a bad shot or hits a ball into the water or whatever. I want to beat you at your best. I want to beat the best version of you because I play my best that day. I don't want to beat you because you fumble. I don't want to beat you because you hit balls out of water. I don't want to beat other countries because their athletes fall on their skates or whatever the sport may be. But yeah, I think that's a good point. It's being proud of who you are and not cheering for the downfall of your opponents.
Mm-hmm. So I will bring up the super chat. 3 a.m. Rion, thank you so much for the $10 donation. That really helps. We're trying to get one of our shows onto a podcast now, and that's like half of what we need for our first month. So thank you. And they say that's how I feel too, Skeptic Haven. That groupthink distorts morality more than anything else I can think of. I think that's a very good point. I mean, groupthink is essentially one group's definition of morality. And we live in a country that is pluralistic, that is supposed to be pluralistic, and is supposed to stay pluralistic. It is not supposed to eventually become one thing or another dominated. It is supposed to stay pluralistic with all sorts of different, immigrants to an appropriate number of immigrants. I mean, how many generations? Pretty much every generation, it's certainly since the 1900s and the Statue of Liberty went up, have been immigrants at some time, and we are stronger for every piece of every element in it, and we are weaker when any particular group takes dominance. Anything to add to that before I
No,
move on?
well said.
Thank you. Okay, I still don't have a call, people. Please give us a call. Something's got to be bugging you at the back of your brain. Ask me about how to grow tomatoes or something like that if you get really desperate.
Sounds like you want to tell us how to grow tomatoes, Phil.
Yeah, well, not really, but let's see. There's a question on woke here, which actually I'm going to delete because we did woke last week. So that was a very good show. Check out last week's episode of Let's Talk. Let's see. Let me grab one here. Well, I'm just going to grab. Do you think it's inconsistent for someone who lacks belief in God to work against God's existence by attempting to show that God doesn't exist? That's kind of a long one.
Simply stated, no. Because people who claim to believe in a non-fictional version of Yahweh, capital God is essentially Yahweh. That's what I call it. It helps prevent ambiguity or confusion in this conversation space. But the issue with people claiming to believe this thing is nonfiction is it manifests in their behaviors. It manifests in their actions, and they go out and they tithe. They stand on the street corners like the JWs and waste their whole lives talking about what is essentially nonsense in my book. And that causes me physical pain to watch people have their lives essentially stolen from them. They steal your life by telling you there's an afterlife. So if I care about my fellow man, which I do, and woman, man, all of us together, if I care about them, then and they're walking around in this bamboozled headspace, I want to help alleviate that. I want to help them accomplish their goal of having right ideas in their head and not wrong ideas in their head. So I think it is perfectly consistent to go out and have conversations with people about their ideas if you find those ideas are incorrect. And like we mentioned in the show earlier, I think it's perfectly consistent for a person who is a believer to walk up to me and try to talk about my ideas and try to help me from my their perception of my being bamboozled as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not walking up to Comic-Con fans talking to them, hey, you shouldn't wear that Wookiee outfit, or you shouldn't wear that Stormtrooper outfit, or you shouldn't wear that Batman outfit, because people don't go into the voting booths to take rights away from their fellow man based upon their belief in Star Wars or their belief in Batman. But people do go into the voting booth to vote to take away rights from their fellow man because of their belief in Yahweh. And that's where the rubber meets the road. That's why those beliefs are actionable. So as soon as you make those beliefs part of the political spectrum, which affect everybody, you've opened them up to my scrutiny.
Yeah. I mean, just because you believe Superman is a stronger character than Spider-Man doesn't mean you have the right to pass laws to take away everybody's Spider-Man comics.
But that's just the point, though, is people with Superman or Spider-Man preferences aren't voting on laws to take away rights from other comic book believers or comic book fans. But, religious people do vote to take away rights or to impose their rights or to impose their religion by putting "In God We Trust" on the money or putting the Ten Commandments up in public schools. Is that what they're doing in Texas I just saw a few days ago? Which
Multiple
is horrific.
states.
It's horrifying. And I mean, they get around this by saying, it's secular. I mean, that's what the Supreme Court said. "In God we trust" on the money is a secular phrase because it represents all of us. I can't even begin to imagine how you square that circle, that the phrase "In God we trust" is secular. No.
And I agree with you. I mean, lack belief in God to work against God's existence. To me, this is really becomes down to, we've got people literally believing in things that are not real. And I can take it into, I always take it into the science realm because that's kind of my field. But, you know, if someone believes in God, this is actually one of the things that Kelly said, that actually he said he had to assume that God existed at the beginning of the Bible, and then the rest of it makes sense. So he made that assumption. He made that
you read the Bible
up front.
You read the Bible with a statement in your head, this book is true, as opposed to a question, is this book true? And if you've started with this statement with the assumption that it's true, it doesn't matter what it says. It doesn't matter if it says donkeys talk or serpents talk, or if you find clear contradictions. It's irrelevant because you've already decided before you got started the book is true.
Yeah.
It's the difference between reading it with a statement or a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when someone is believing in God and, like Eric said, doing things that are going to affect other people, especially in a period of history and time and science knowledge, which is basically just all human knowledge, that what is true, you're doing things that are just factually wrong. I mean, we do not need people going into schools and teaching creationism next to evolution. That's just factually incorrect in 2023. So it's those types of things. You don't see us out there making a stink about people doing horoscope viewings or playing with tarot cards or something like that, whether they even if they completely believe it, because they aren't really doing anybody harm. They're just kind of doing it themselves. They're either doing it for their own amusement or they actually believe it and they live their lives. I mean, look at all the decisions that Nancy Reagan made for Ronald Reagan based on astrology, was it? Or I think it was astrology. But yeah, we get involved when you affect other people. And
well, Mary Todd Lincoln was famous for holding seances in the White House as well. I would take a slightly different approach to that. I think astrology is harmful because people go out in their lives and make decisions based upon what is effectively nonsense, that the stars in the position over your head, as relatively seen from us with imaginary lines drawn between them with animals and so forth, has some bearing on your personality or your luck or your relationship status for the day. I think that does cause harm, but that is definitely an alligator that is very far from the boat. The alligator that is closest to the boat is evangelical Protestant Christianity that is effectively infecting very large portions of the voting public in this country as well. Just for what it's worth, I want to make a comment, if for nothing else, just to be very clear of this. The way the last statement was phrased, lack belief, everybody has a different take on this about lack theism or atheism or strong atheism or weak atheism. The way I find it best to express my idea is I say I'm a person who thinks that Yahweh or all supernatural claimed versions of God's deities are fictional. I don't say they don't exist. I think fictional things do exist. They exist in our heads as concepts, purely as mental stuff. But I think those things are imaginary. And for me, when I have these conversations, if I keep that narrative, it expresses my ideas much more clearly than getting into the whole, what is the normative definition of atheism or lack theism or so forth. I realize people play a lot of different games with those terms and so forth, but for me, I say I think Yahweh is fictional or imaginary, purely conceptual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to take what's our time here? Let's do one more of these, and then we'll wrap it up after that, unless someone calls in. Feel free to call. You're still free to call in 984-789-4787 or use the URL on screen. Let's see, they got several things that are on morality here, but I don't want to get into that. That's too big a subject. There's a woke question, so I'm going to take that one out because we're past that already too. This is a little out left field, but let's try it just to mix it up. I will be shunned by my community and family if I come out. What should I do? What are your thoughts on that?
I am definitely not in a position to advise somebody to put themselves in jeopardy, financial jeopardy or housing jeopardy. If I can only trust your judgment in that situation. If you feel like you're in a situation where you're going to be in danger, if you come out, then I personally think that the most responsible thing to do is to keep that to yourself until you are in a position where you can be honest about it. I don't know if that's the best advice, but I would be very afraid of advising someone to put themselves in any danger?
I'm going to take it a little bit further. I agree with you, but I'm going to take it a little bit further. First off, it is an individual decision. You know, you're the only one who knows your situation and your conditions, and what's going to happen in terms of, are you going to lose a job? Are you going to lose the only income that you have? These types of things. As far as shunning, just that word itself means that the religion you are in is more cult than not. So if there is a chance of being shunned, I would want to get out. I would want to get out. So I would say, if it's not the right time, dog wants to come in. If it's not the right time because of all those other factors, I would suggest to try to at least put yourself in, or think that at some point in the future you will get out of this situation, even if it comes at some cost. But you are the only one who can make that personal decision about how much cost is worth it and how much is not worth it. Because you are going to, if you stay there, you are going to have to live with knowing that what you're doing is factually wrong and harmful, especially passing these beliefs on to the next generation.
I think this is also a chore that we have as a skeptic community, is to create our own communities on the outside. So people who are afraid of being shunned by the groups they've grown up in, they have some refuge, they have somewhere to go. So I participate in secular groups all in my local area and online. So we give these people somewhere to go. I think that's kind of beset upon us to give a soft landing zone to somebody who's afraid. Nathan Phelps, the son of Fred Phelps, tells a great story about this, about when he was deconverting from their version of Calvinism in, I think it's Wichita, Kansas, about how he was terrified to come out and tell the truth about how he felt. He thought it was all just a giant scam. It was nonsense. But he waited until the midnight on his 18th birthday, and he was standing in the kitchen of his father's house, and he screamed at the top of his lungs, and he walked away, just walked out of the house, or ran. Maybe he ran a few blocks, a few miles, I'm not sure, but he slept on a gas station bathroom floor for a couple of nights, which is really terrifying. And I would be scared to that myself, especially as an 18-year-old kid who wasn't given coping mechanisms to deal with the outside world, which I'm sure they weren't. I'm making a few assumptions there. But it was very, very scary for him, and I don't blame somebody else for making that calculation in their head about whether or not they should or shouldn't do it, and falling down on the side of, I think I'm going to stay here when it's safer. But like Phil mentioned, if you find yourself in a position where you can get out, especially if you are raising kids and those kids are going to be indoctrinated in the same situation, if you can find your way out, then by all means, please do so.
Yeah. Yep. And we've got Recovering from Religion up on the screen. That's always going to be an always available source to you. So there is the atheist community out there, and shows like this and people you can talk to. But Recovering from Religion is always there. So please make use of that. I think that's going to about wrap us up, Eric. I want to, well, first, thank you, Eric. I think you did a great job, and he is officially on our Skeptic Haven team as a co-host of Let's Talk. You'll probably see him with whoever he gets paired to with. Well, that's not up to us, but
thank you to Wes and you, Phil, and the whole team. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Let's do it again. I'm going
Amen.
I'm going to cover us up just for 1 second because I want to talk about the Better Conference. And the reason I want to cover us up is because it'll be easy for me to read. So coming up ahead in August, 5th and 6th in Columbia City, Indiana, near Fort Worth, you want to consider coming to the Better Convention. This is only the second year. And if anybody out there knows the Tang Group and Oz, this is a convention he put on last year for the first time. And I was there, and it's an amazing experience because it's a little less formal than I don't know, a more formal organization. So there's a lot of people there that are just really nice to talk to, and you'll meet some great people. I mean, meeting Genetically Modified Skeptic and Dave Warnock that are on screen here was just a blast. These people are accessible. So far, he's got Josh Bowen, Cynthia McDonald, Stephanie Holmes, Amy Newman, Aunt Kathy. That's Oz's actual aunt. Godless Granny, Beat the Cult. I don't know if that's a musical group offhand. Heathen Queen, Godless Engineer, Jenna Mayu, of course, and I'm sure there will be more. It's a hangout. It's going to be a lot of fun. So please make your plans to be there as soon as you can, so we can have a really good showing this year. I think that's going to wrap us up. I don't see any more calls. So thank you, Eric, and thank you, Wes, back screen. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you to the chat participants as well. That was entertaining.
I want to give a thank to our patrons. Where's our patron list? Thank you, Sydney Davis Jr., who's a comedian who just did a show a couple weeks ago. Check her out. Eric, Tara, Ryan, Deneen Murphy, Dandy, Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, and myself. This is too short. Take me off. But make this list longer so we can keep doing these things. Thank you. I had a lot of fun today. I'll see you guys online next week. Take care.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.